back to the Build Propulsion Lab here at Community Over Code in Denver. I'm Brian Demers, and with me today is another Brian Fox.
Hi, everyone.
Brian, welcome. So today we're going to talk about the State of the Supply Chain Report, the 10th version, 10th edition. So before we start, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Brian Fox, co-founder, CTO at Sonatype. I've been involved in Apache forever, right? Apache Maven project. I'm also on the OpenSSF governing board and a bunch of related fun stuff.
Great. Well, Brian, you actually got me involved, I think, with the Apache Foundation too, many years ago, so I appreciate that as well. So, 10 years of doing this report. Are we in a better position now than 10 years ago?
Ish. Those that have heard me talk about this, know I'm not super psyched about the pace at which the ecosystem is getting better. But there are some changes. We in this year's report, every year we take a look at vulnerabilities, and we do deep dive analysis on different things related to open source software consumption and dependencies and enterprise application usage and that stuff. This year, because it was the 10th year, we did a 10-year look back. So I looked at trends across multiple different dimensions. One of them, the attack vectors, how they've evolved in the last 10 years. It's quite shocking, right? I think the attackers, unfortunately, win the prize in the most innovation in the last 10 years. 10 years ago was before the first big Struts vulnerability that basically nobody heard about, right? Because it was early and people weren't really paying attention. It was before the Equifax breach. It was before SolarWinds. And so we've seen a massive rise in these types of attacks. We saw last year, or this year, in 2024, the attempted takeover of the XZ utils, which was potentially sophisticated, potentially nation-state type of attack. And this year, in this year's report, we disclosed that the number of intentionally malicious open source components is up again, 156% this year. So last year it was around 300,000. This year it's about 706,000. So these are fake components published in NPM, Ruby, Python, things like that, that are designed to trick, steal data. It's basically a phishing attack on developers.
Yeah. So supply chain security is becoming, not that it wasn't important before, but it is now even more important because there's so many bad actors out there.
Yeah, I mean, after the Log4Shell sort of attack, vulnerability, if you will, and the following attacks, I think regulators have started to get involved, in the last couple of years. So I put them in second place in terms of improvement, representatives from CISA were here yesterday. We did a tabletop exercise with the Apache infrastructure team and the board and a bunch of other folks, and I've participated in that exercise a handful of times. It always leads to new epiphanies. So I think CISA is doing a great job getting involved, in the last handful of years. Unfortunately, the data shows, though, that publishers and consumers aren't really keeping up. So the publishers, we did the analysis over the 10 years, looked at how many projects are improving their release frequency, and it's up significantly. It's up 1,400% in the last 10 years. So projects are releasing faster. It is good.
So we're releasing faster. It's easier to push. It's never been easier to push packages up to maybe Central or whatever your repository. But
with me, there's always a but.
There's always a but.
There's always a but. The time to remediate vulnerabilities in open source dependencies for open source projects for their dependencies 10 years ago was something like days, 10 days on average. Now, unfortunately, we're up to 300 days on average. So it's almost a year. So they're releasing faster, but taking significantly more time to actually patch dependencies, vulnerabilities in their dependencies.
So that's kind of
not great.
Counterintuitive, wouldn't it? I mean,
yeah.
I would think if you could release faster, you could patch vulnerabilities faster.
You would think so, but if you look at the chart of the CVE growth, that's up significantly over the last 10 years as well. And so I think the problem is largely maintainers are getting buried in this work. They're getting asked to do more. And we know with the rise of generative AI, we've seen a lot of projects basically getting DDoSed with fake pull requests, fake reports that look they look real. They're hard to spot anymore, right? And so all of these things are contributing to slower fixes in the publishers.
Yeah, there's definitely more vulnerabilities being reported. I know I do a talk on the number of vulnerabilities that are reported every year, and there's definitely a clear trend line up. So I know last year, if you average out all the vulnerabilities, it's 80 per day.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I mean,
Obviously-
we're looking at it here. It's it was almost 30,000 last year.
That is not to the level where developers can manually do this.
No.
So we need tools to do these things
That's
for
right.
us. Which would imply if we need tools to do them, we have tools. There's all kinds of bots and things to update your dependencies. And if it's easy to release, shouldn't those go hand in hand?
They should, but I think organizations are still, by and large, not paying attention to this problem on average. There are definitely companies that are doing a great job, early adopters, for more than a decade now, but the stats are showing that on average, it's still a pretty terrible situation. One of the stats we've reported the last 3 years, speaks to sort of the reaction after Log4j. People were saying, open source should do a better job fixing their stuff faster. Log4j, they patched that thing over like Thanksgiving weekend, right? And as we sit now, 13% of the downloads are still of those known vulnerable versions nearly 3 years later. Right, and so we've looked at that stat, but also we looked at when something that is known to be vulnerable is consumed. How often is it because it's not patched yet? And it turns out that's only 4% of the time. 96% of the time, when somebody's consuming a known vulnerable component, there is already a better version available.
96% of the time.
96% of the time. That was 3 years ago. It got better. This year, it's 95% of the time.
That's horrible.
So we've been in the margins. It finally rounds down to 95 instead of rounds up to 96 in 3 years. It's progress, man, but it's slow.
Okay. So I think last time I talked to you, 30% of downloads on Maven Central were Log4j,
Yeah.
or sorry, a vulnerable version of Log4j.
That had Log4Shell.
And now it's only 13.
Yes, that's better.
That's better.
It took year 3 for that to really make a significant change.
And there's no patterns in this, so it's not just one person's build downloading Log4j.
That's right. We talked about this before. I did a lot of work earlier this year, trying to identify patterns. Is it like one build? Is it one tool? Is it one single dependency that's introducing it? I couldn't find anything besides your normal noise of random stuff. So it's just normal usage. People are using it. I was hoping to find maybe there's a weird Apache Spark deployment on Amazon that's always doing this, and I can go talk to them. No such luck.
No, so it's just various builds everywhere.
Just builds, just people still legitimately using it. Yeah.
All right, so what do we do then? So what's the solution? How do we get people to update their software, update their components, not use?
Well, I mean, that's where I think the regulators are coming in. They've been pushing, you've got SBOM legislation, PCI standards are going to require that type of stuff next year. Over in Europe, you're seeing the Cyber Resiliency Act and big fines for not doing it. I think that will encourage the consumers to go in that direction. One of the interesting findings, we did some work with Tidelift, we found that paid maintainers are like 3 times more likely to have a security policy, actually respond to the things, and their mean time to remediate their vulnerabilities is actually down in like the days to weeks, not the years problem. So statistically it shows that foundations do a better job on average, and also when the maintainers are actually getting some supplemental income to work on these projects, they do a tremendously better job.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, if I have to work on something on the weekends, it's definitely less important to me personally, unless I'm getting paid.
Right.
So, so I guess we should be paying our maintainers.
That statistically is shown to help. Yes.
All right. Well, great. So other than paying our maintainers, where can folks go to learn more about the state of the supply chain security?
Close. State of the software supply chain.
I keep saying it wrong. Yes, I got all the words.
That's right, all the words. Sonatype.com/SSCR. It'll probably be a huge banner on top of our website too, so you'll be able to find it. 10th annual. We're also doing some sessions on deep dive on this, plus the Tidelift report, plus the state of open source and finance report that came out last week as well. So there's 3 sessions. You can find those on alldaydevops.com as well.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, Brian, it's always a pleasure having you here. So thanks for being on the show. And we'll